This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Eva, I'll wait for you to get back to your chair. Terrific. Good afternoon. I should turn my phone off. It always rings when I'm on a conference call. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think we're ready to begin. It's 1:30. We have an hour set aside for a presentation this morning and a lot of ground to cover. My name is Laurie McIsaac, and I am the Director of Operations with RTO9, Southeastern Ontario's Voice for Tourism. Today's webinar is being presented by Eva Gutsche of STEM Consulting. Give the crowd a wave, Eva. Eva's been working with tourism operators across the country and helping these businesses adapt to the impacts of COVID-19. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our industry website, tourismtalk.ca, and will also be posted to our social media channels. Please feel free to revisit the content yourself and to share it with colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions, so please look to the QA chat box on the right side of your screen in the control panel. If you think of a question for Eva at any point, please just type it in there and I'll either pose it to Eva at the time or hold for the discussion portion at the end of this presentation. Following today's webinar, you will receive a brief survey in your inbox. We kindly ask you to provide us with your feedback so we can improve pushing forward. Okay, brilliant. Let's get started. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Eva, who's going to start today's presentation. Eva, it's all yours.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Laurie. Great to be here, a nice turnout today, so thank you so much. And as Laurie mentioned, I've had the chance to work with several provinces and RTOs and DMOs across the country. And of course, everybody is at different stages across the country and all trying to figure out how we maneuver through this. So I've got some interesting research and information to share with you today and some resources. As Laurie mentioned, the workshop will be available after, the webinar will be available after the session today. And really would like your input. I know you're busy trying to figure out your next steps. I think we're all trying to figure out how we ended up with this extra time, but are still quite as busy as we probably were or close. And since you're spending that time with me today, I really want to make sure you get return on your time invested. So as we're going through, if you've got a piece of paper and pen handy or some way to jot this down on an open file on your computer, just consider one immediate thing that you will need to do once we complete this webinar. And I'm sure that something will pop up for you or something you haven't considered or an idea will spark. So I'm hoping for that for you to make sure that you take information from this and make it work for your business. And we're so focused on this immediacy of kind of what's happening when we open up and when do we open up and what do we do with this? But we also don't want to lose sight of the longer term picture. So, of our business plan overall, though it's been certainly disrupted, but what is something we can do a little longer term in order to impact our business, maybe not 2020, but 2021 and beyond. So a couple of little things for you to do throughout this. Again, Laurie mentioned, we'd love your input. We've got a couple of opportunities throughout the webinar where we're seeking input from you, and you have a chance to share with your colleagues. Had some great ideas come up across the country of kind of things that you can do within your business, or challenges that you're just maybe not sure how to get through that right now. And so maybe we can share some of those ideas. So what we're going to take a look at is really easing back into business. So what it will look like and the requirements for your guests and your staff. And we really go beyond this. It's your business partners, it's your associates, it's your supply chain. Everything is impacted as a result of the pandemic. And so how do we now ease back into business and work through this? And we're in an interesting position because we're both. We are the business operator trying to work through COVID-19, and we're also consumers at different stages of the day, the week. Perhaps things have happened to you after March or just around March 12th. We'll take a little look at that of travel plans. So we get a chance to actually look at it from both lenses. And so in there, it's great too, because some of those things that you're seeing, you can actually incorporate as well. And so mentioned already, the dealing with the travel plans. So I know you've got bookings, and I know the big question is, are they going to materialize, and how do I work my way through that? I had cancellation policies. What do I do? The border's closed. So we'll take a little look at that and come up with, share some ideas and things that are happening around the country. And the staff interactions, it's when we start looking at your team members. Whether you're a small operation with, less than 10 employees, or you're a large operation with over 200 employees, the role of that team member has changed, or is about to change if you haven't opened yet. And so how do you then, as a leader in the business, how do you inspire change? How do you determine what the new roles are? Because there will have to be new roles based on the requirements that you're facing. So lots of interesting things with the staff. And how are the staff feeling? Are they comfortable being back in the workplace with everything that's going on? What's happening in their personal lives that may impact their role at work. So, do they live with a senior that's maybe got some compromised health issues? As a result, are they feeling a fear factor that others may not? So we've got lots of moving pieces here. And we'll talk a little wee bit about market expectations and look at what the province is doing and how that all aligns. And so I'd love some input here from you. If you want to, actually, we're going to do this in the chat function. So when you're thinking of leadership qualities, so we touched on some of the different roles that you will need to take. So what leadership qualities do you feel are essential in dealing with COVID-19, the crisis, and business reopening? So if I could get some input, and Lori's going to share those as they come through. Great, and as you're going through that and popping some information in there, there's so many qualities that we need at this time. And so tapping into the quality that you may have, the skill or the quality, and then looking at others in your team that can bring that to the forefront. So Lori, do we have some input?
Everyone's quiet today.
Everyone's
Eva,
quiet.
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay. Okay, that's okay. We'll just continue.
Okay, here we go. Now they're coming through.
They're coming.
So we have flexibility, compassion, agility, positive messaging. That's a big one.
Nice.
Again, yep, agility.
Okay, fantastic. So I think the key ones are certainly there. There's a whole number of them. So let me share a little bit from my research with you. And so we heard flexibility and agility, absolutely. Positivity came up there. Probably one of the big ones here. It's always been a strong requirement, and it's those strong, effective communication skills. So how do I'm communicating with my customers, with my team, trying to get product. So that becomes very critical, and the innovation piece. And so we've seen some very interesting innovation already come out of COVID-19. Looking at what some of the restaurants are doing, they've moved from takeout to meal kits, to having, celebrations, to doing online cooking classes to looking at online wine tasting. So, you know, very interesting is what comes out of this. And so, you know, for your business, you know, what is things that you can come up with to make it more profitable, to make it easier for your team and make it easier for your customer, more enjoyable. And certainly in here too, I think I heard the word compassion, so empathy tying into that. And the collaboration piece, you know, we keep hearing the phrase, we're all in this together, and we are. And, you know, in here, if I, you know, can I reach out to others that are in the same boat and see what they're doing here? Can we share information on sourcing personal protection equipment? You know, what are some things we can do from a collaborative standpoint? And I did put structure and policy in here. It's critical because of the requirements that your business is going to be facing, and how, you know, all of a sudden now when you're looking at it, how are you going to implement some of these things? You know, what if the guest doesn't want a social distance? How are you going to work with that? So really interesting when we start looking at that and how you roll that information out. So a quote here came up that I thought really summed this up. The best leaders don't just know one style of leadership, they're skilled at several, and have the flexibility to switch between the styles as the circumstances dictate. And so really, you know, where we're at, reopening has started. So right now what's happening, it's interesting when we look across the country. You know, a month ago, we're all kind of in the same boat, and now we're not. So, you know, you can get a massage and a haircut in BC, you know, and in other places in the country. Some restaurants are open already, some places in the country. Other provinces have their entire border shut down, that only local residents are welcome in. So a very, very different scenario across the country. So the time to get ready is now. And I know when I've had conversations with different operators going, well, I can't really do anything till I know that this is happening. But by the time you find out that is happening, it's too late to start planning and to start sourcing and to start implementing. So the time is really now. And yes, the scenarios may change. And maybe you're waiting for an announcement that's critical for your business. But if that doesn't happen, what's your next plan? I ran across this. This was from an article that I sourced out of from Skift, and it just summed it up so well. Coronavirus, however, has become the perfect storm. It's a combination of the fear factor as seen after 9/11 at a global scale, the financial impact of the 2009 recession amplified, and a widespread implementation of border closures that we've never seen before. So we've got everything culminating, and we're trying to work through this. And so now we've got, you know, into Ontario, we still have the self-isolation. The cleaning and hygiene practices are certainly heightened all over. And when we start looking around the province, it's a little bit different around the province. So I'm speaking to you from Toronto today, and we, you know, we have, of course, we have the practices, the guidelines, but we've also had all these extra pieces implemented by the businesses. And we're going to talk about that, because when the customer is looking at your business down the line when things open up, hygiene and safety practices from a health standpoint will be compared. And so how do, you know, yes, you're following the guidelines, but what are others doing that are going over and above the guidelines? Is there, you know, do they have a competitive advantage at this stage in time? So we'll take a look at that. The face coverings and face masks are not mandatory, but they're certainly recommended. That's from a legislative standpoint. However, many businesses, it is a requirement. So if you don't have a mask, you don't get through the door. And that's happening in places in Ontario, certainly here in Toronto. The whole situation with the seniors, which has been so incredibly tragic. So the increased protection there. And the group size, you know, it's we're still at 5. That's very different in the country. I heard yesterday that in Alberta, it's for outdoor gatherings, it's up to 50. So quite a bit of difference. And then the physical distancing. And so I'm going to share a couple of things that have kind of happened around the world. And so interesting putting this webinar together, because the information changes daily. So, which is great. You know, we're very flexible and agile with what's going on out there. So this you've all seen. So we've got a three-stage plan here in Ontario. So stage 2, where things are starting to open up, but they're opening up with in a different way than the business had run perhaps, 3-4 months ago. And so we're seeing 3 to 5 stages. We still have the self-isolation mentioned that some provincial borders are closed. And the whole focus is on the steady decline of cases. And ours right now is going up and down. It was unfortunately up again today. And the part that I think is really interesting is that when are we going to get back to normal? I'm not sure if that back to normal, if we'll ever get back completely to there, because what's happening too is how people do business, working from home, working remotely, and all these factors that they may play out in the long term. But there has been a general feeling out there until a vaccine is developed in market, we can expect business not as normal. And so when we're starting to look globally, tourism in some countries in Europe, they are now doing their marketing, targeting tourists for late June. The temperature check across the globe is quite interesting. It's quite different. And so even here in some businesses in Toronto, mandatory temperature check, not just for staff, but also for guests. And so these are things that you can look at. It's not a requirement in order to run your business, but if you feel that this is a great way to keep your business a little safer, and it's not difficult for you to implement, and it's not cost prohibitive, maybe that's something you want to consider. So many of the things that I'll be presenting today are not so much about the guidelines, but I'm going to reinforce where you can find those, some of the bare minimum, but also sharing some of the extra pieces out there that you can take a look at to ensure that your customers, you yourself as business owners and operators, and your team feel safe. The whole technology piece, so interesting. I've got some great examples there. And all businesses are going to be facing restrictions and guidelines. And so we start taking a look at the customers, the suppliers, the business associates, and your team. So I do have workplace safety website here for you to reference. You'll see some links throughout the presentation. If you need any more information after the presentation, Lori and I are both there for you. Lori, any comments or questions so far before I continue on?
Yeah, Eva?
Any comments or questions at this stage?
Nothing.
Okay,
no,
let me.
Not yet. Actually, I will say one thing. So when you were looking for some feedback on leadership qualities, there's an interesting one that came through, which I think is very relevant, and that it's okay to make mistakes.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That's a great one. I think it's so easy. It's so easy to follow, and I got to do everything right. And unfortunately, right now we don't know what all that is. And some of this is trial and error. We're seeing people trying different things, and with innovation, there will be some things that will work really well and some not so much. So thank you so much for that. So let's get a little feedback going. So who here started to identify some changes needed through this? I'm going to put, it's not really post, it's during COVID-19, and started planning and implementing. So how many of you have already got some plans in place? Or how many of you are at this point still trying to figure out what we need to do? So if you can pop that in there, that'd be great. I'm going to go continue on, and I'm going to come back and reference the question. And so some of the things that we're going to take a look at here, and they may be some things that you've already started to take a look at. So I've got 6 areas that I would like to focus on today, and that's looking at the cleaning and hygiene, staff and guest safety. And so the training piece here, the training piece is going to be, there'll be some very tactical training elements of how to mix solution to ensure that it meets a standard to kill bacteria. So that would be a very tactical approach. And then more of a soft skill, how do we deal with a guest not willing to comply with the new standards that your business has implemented. Touch a little bit on food and beverage, the communication piece, for sure, and then a little on technology. So any comments, Laura, before I continue on?
Yes, so we've had a few come back and say that yes, they do have plans
Okay.
some that are underway for different stages, and one is developing plans and securing PPE.
Okay. That one has come up a lot. I don't know how many of you are running into challenges. I did a workshop, I guess it was last week, and that was the biggest thing that we're running across is kind of how do I source this? I'm running into challenges. I know I need to up my cleaning game, but I can't find product. So interesting to hear that. And so really considering what you need to consider now. So looking at the whole cleaning, sanitation, and hygiene piece. So there are please check out the provincial site. So they're making recommendations of things that you do. And the guests will want to know what you're doing. So all of a sudden now when you start looking at your website, you're going, of course, you've always had fantastic images, you've had ways to make a booking or buy your product or service, and now you probably want to consider posting your cleaning, hygiene, and safety standards, because guests are going to be looking for that. And so the guidelines are the minimum, and as I mentioned, many businesses are going over and above, and I'm going to share some of those shortly. And so also consider, what products you're going to need to operate your business. So the PPE that was just mentioned, absolutely. But you have intel into your community. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the things that are happening within the community, you don't know till you get there. So I had that experience a couple of weeks ago. I went into a grocery store that I normally go to, and there was a big sign on the door that said no masks, no entry. And I didn't have a mask, so I couldn't go in on that particular day. And so if there's things that are happening in your community, if you're finding that perhaps that's something that you've noticed, or that, even once the restaurants are opening, maybe not all of them decided to open right away. So we're finding that, I'm finding that here in my community, certain businesses are allowed to open, but some have chosen to just wait. And so that information to pass that on. So, and also consider, some products that you may want to have for sale at your place of business that the guests may be seeking. And then the big one is these high touch points. We keep hearing these high traffic areas. So that door handle that everyone grabs as they come into your business, what are you going to put into place for that? There's different, you can wipe it down, you could look at something a little more automated, you can keep the door open if that's allowed for safety standards or makes sense within your business. So how do we work through that? And guests want to know what to expect in advance of their arrival. So this becomes a great communication piece, just to let you know this has now happened since you made the booking or since we spoke 2 weeks ago. And then really the whole cleaning piece is really now a product differentiator. So I wanted to share on that. I wanted to share the product differentiator, wanted to share the Air Canada example. So some of you may have seen it. Certainly encourage you to look at the website. I thought they laid it out in a really simple way to follow and understand, with some little icons and some information that's very specific and dates applied to that. So the temperature check that mentioned earlier, that is now mandatory for staff and passengers. It's a no-touch thermometer. Till the end of June, there won't be anyone sitting next to you, so that middle seat is now gone. And they really detail their extensive cleaning. So they talk about the cleaning that happens throughout the day, cleaning that happens throughout the flight, and then in the evening, the really extensive cleaning that covers the ceilings and everything else. They talk about the amenities that will be available to you, and talk about the bathroom. So that's a big high touch area, how that will be dealt with during the flight, and that masks are now mandatory. So you will be wearing a mask for the duration of the flight, and they will be available for you if you need them. So interesting how they've handled that. And I found a couple of others here. And so, we start looking at shifts. So I thought this one here, this is a big international hotel company. Each hotel will have a hygiene manager on staff as of September. So if you're a big organization, adding that role is an option. trying to, everyone's trying to look at how do I minimize touch. So is there something I can do with technology? So in some of the companies that you can check in with your phone, you don't have to go to the desk. Some companies are looking at really focusing on the training. So all the products within their brand have extensive training guidelines support to help them through it. Some interesting partnerships. So one big brand partnering with the Mayo Clinic, other one partnering with Lifecycle, and one kind of looking at it now going, they're going to have electrostatic sprayers to clean the room after your stay with hospital grade disinfectant. So some of these things, if you are not a big brand, is really difficult, but recognizing that, there might be similar, if you're a small inn, a family run or local inn, and your customers would stay with you or one of the branded properties, this could be a comparison factor. So interesting what's happening. Cleanliness as a differentiator. I popped AirBnB in here. Thought it was interesting how they've approached it. So they have a 2-tier process. So back to that comment, you may not be able to, electrostatic sprayers may not be in the realm, and that's okay. It's not required. But Airbnb's laid out a 2-tier structure. So if you can actually meet all the criteria of tier 1, the room only has to stay vacant for 24 hours before reoccupying. If it's a lighter cleaning method than tier 1, now you've got to wait 72 hours. Well, that's it, and it's tough because it's already a shortened season when we're looking at 2020 recovery. So again, if your customers would be considering maybe staying with you or an Airbnb, if you're an accommodator, you may be compared. And so we start looking at the whole food and beverage piece. And so we're seeing many things, some of the recommendations coming out, limiting the menu, taking all the touch items off the table. You may change your preparation protocol and the serving protocol, are your staff going to wear gloves and a mask? If you're an inn and you're used to serving breakfast or perhaps having breakfast out where the guests help themselves, well, now you've got to come up with a plan B. So buffets appear out for the time being. So that isn't going to work. If you've got a capacity or if you've got a small breakfast room, now you've got an issue with capacity in order to, you have to meet these physical distancing requirements. So many factors in here to consider. So how the food is, what food you're going to serve, how it's prepared, how it's served, and how the guests are going to engage with the food. So are they going to be sitting at a table, or are you going to find another way to allow them to enjoy that? So let's get a little chat going here. Would really like to hear what you anticipate to be your biggest challenge with the new health, safety, and hygiene standards. So what is the part that you're kind of going at, this is going to be a challenge for me. How do I address this? So I'm going to continue on with the slide, and Lori, I'm going to come back and check in with you. So while you're answering that. And so we've got the whole health screening and health measures. And this is a really tricky one too. So if you are going to survey your customers in advance upon arrival at your place of business, be it an attraction, an experience, food and beverage, an accommodation, other tourism or tourist service, perhaps sending that to them in advance so they know that this is going to be happening. And you may have the same, something for your staff. So are you screening them upon arrival? And then really coming up with a plan. What happens if one of your guests gets ill while they're with you? So if you're an experience for a couple of hours, that's not probably going to have a big impact. But if you find out 3 days later that one of the guests that you had on your experience has tested positive, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to roll that out to the other guests that may have come in contact? So we've got lots of considerations here of how that's going to work. And then what happens if one of your team members falls ill? So, what plan would you want to put in place? Communication plan, safety plan, what does that look like? There was was just out this morning for a walk, and someone was telling me that someone had come in, someone, you know, having some challenges, some mental challenges, and went into a business and stated that they had COVID. So crazy situation, something, you know, not planned at all. And at that point, the business chose to close for 24 hours because they weren't sure. So these are some of the considerations. So many things already at us, so then we have to consider these as well. So Lori, any feedback there we can share?
Yes, Eva, there's a question here about how often to clean public bathrooms.
Okay, I missed the first part of that answer. Is that a question?
Here?
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit there.
This was a question, how often to clean public bathrooms?
Okay, and that's a really great question.
Can you see the chat bubble, Eva?
Sorry? Okay, can you hear me? Just want to double check.
Yes.
Okay. And so these are, you know, when we start looking at the guidelines, they're not that, you don't have something that says, you know, every 3 guests and you have to clean it. And so this is something that you will have to determine. So looking at your higher touch point areas, they're going to need more frequency in the cleaning. And these guidelines may change as we move along. So, you know, that's a really fantastic thing to kind of consider, you know, when you're looking at bringing your staff back in and how often you're going to do this and what that cleaning looks like. So, you know, what aspects of the bathroom are you going to clean? What are you going to have, you know, antiseptic right there in the bathroom that they use when they, you know, leave the bathroom, and how are you going to deal with that door handle? Absolutely fantastic. And that becomes a really, you know, really critical thing to put a plan into place. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but there's no direct answer.
I think, Eva, can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. All of this, of course, is going to come down in more detail from public health. You know, we're all looking for answers now, and unfortunately they're not there, but they will be handed down through public health as we move forward. The second question here, the challenges in ensuring compliance among guests who are reluctant to follow the rules. Do we ask staff to intervene?
Okay, and that one has come up so often, and I think it's a really, really important one to address. And so when you take a look at it, it won't be all your customers. There'll be 1 or 2 that, and you may not run into it, but if you do, their lack of compliance with the policy that your business has established, which falls in line with the provincial guidelines, ensures the safety for the staff, for you as a business operator, and for your other guests. So yes, you have to address that. And so some of the things that you're seeing is that guests right now, you know, you probably, when I'm going to take an accommodation approach here, if that's okay. So when you're checking in, I'm sure you've had to agree that the room is non-smoking, and if you smoke, X will happen, that you're normally charged a big cleaning fee. And so and if you're, you know, you've seen in some, if there's excessive noise and you get guest complaints, this is what will happen. And this will be another clause that you'll want to consider. So these are the guidelines. If you don't follow them, you may be asked to leave in order to ensure the safety of the other guests and your team members. And so it's a really valid comment. And so that's 2 pieces. So one, now you're looking at the policy piece. So putting that in place, I would recommend you send it in advance. So when you're reconfirming the bookings, sending that to them. And then the second is, how are you going to train your staff to deliver that message in a direct yet professional and courteous way? So yes, thank you for that. Lori, any others?
I think that's it for now, Eva.
Okay, great. And I'll continue on. Great comments. Thank you so much. And so tied very much into that comment. So this could be a case where, you know, someone is not following the social distancing. And it is a guideline. It's a provincial requirement at this stage. So yes, that has to happen. They could be subject to a ticket, a fine. You know, these are the rules as of today. And so in here, you start wanting to take a look at your business. You know, how is that going to work? So the restaurants, you're going to get some specific criteria as to percentage of space to customers, of how you're going to manage that from one table to the next. But even in your business now, if you've got a lineup, how are you going to manage the lineup? As maybe they're checking in for an experience or a boat trip and they need to sign the waivers. How are you going to manage that maybe differently? And so the communication is critical. So that really, it's managing expectations, and we don't understand the new expectations, or we may not. So really laying that out, you know, providing the guidelines in advance, letting them know what to bring. So back to that comment going, you know, masks are not mandatory in Ontario or in my community, in my town, my city. However, many businesses are requesting that you do wear a mask. So you want to put that in advance. Any pre-screening you're going to do, send that out in advance as well. That would be very important. And then, you know, staff interaction. So assisting how the staff are going to communicate and let them know that this is, you know, they're going to have to wait here and this is how the whole thing's going to flow and one person at a time. So yeah, it's really critical that that communication piece is addressed. And it's going to break down into two areas. So we're going to have the cleaning, safety, hygiene aspects, and then we're going to have the guest interaction. And you know, I was thinking of an example here. There's a car rental company that I use, and their general customer service training is that the agent that's checking me in comes out from the counter and shakes my hand, and then we're standing beside each other, and that's how the entire check-in process had been working. So that's all going to change. So what is that going to look like now? So I want to touch a little bit on some of the technology pieces, some really interesting examples. And you know, the touchless thermometer, we're hearing about that and seeing that more and more. I know my gym here in town, it hasn't opened, but the tennis aspect has. And they sent out, you know, a notice in advance saying that your temperature will be taken upon arrival with the touchless thermometer. And if you're above 100.5, you will not be granted entry. So that, you know, you knew in advance going in. So, you know, looking at how technology is being used. So this one, this is out of a small private airport, back to the touchless thermometer, but they had a apparatus that they could point that at a customer, at a passenger, and it was meant to screen for guns, for carrying guns. And so this originally designed to use in banks and schools and other high security locations, but now it's being used to see if someone's got a temperature over 100.5. So interesting, you had a repurposing technology. This one too, back to an airport. So this is in Vienna. So in Vienna, at the time of this information, it was a 14-day quarantine for those coming into Austria. And so now there was an option for 190 euros. You could get a COVID-19 test, results in 2 to 3 hours. And if you tested negative, you didn't have to self-quarantine. So interesting. So as we're looking at how destinations, in this case, countries and destinations and places of business are using technology to work within the guidelines, but also, you know, work around the guidelines. So this was a great example of that. Some of you may have heard this, but Uber. So Uber is you know, they have very strict criteria as well for both the driver and the passenger. So both are kept safe. And so now they've got technology to determine whether the driver is wearing their mask. So I know there's lots of concerns of people saying my privacy is you know, really being impacted with all this. Yes, it is, and that's at the cost of safety. So it's an interesting, you know, crossroad that we're at. But the contact tracing is certainly more and more. I know this morning in the news, Manitoba was stating that they would like to see this Canada-wide, and there's apps in place. Alberta had been using an app for this that you can determine if through technology, if you've come into within the physical space of someone who's tested positive. So interesting as we start looking at how this would impact tourism businesses. And so there's lots of resources. I put them in here, so you'll as Lori mentioned, you'll get a copy of the deck, and you can then access some of the great resources out there. And so, I just pulled a couple off. So we're looking at, the best practices. And I'm going to go back to that bathroom comment in here. So, some of the basics, the hand sanitizer, keeping the surfaces clean, all this is stated in there. You still need to review this. So if you're putting plans into place, the recommendation here is that employers should consult with Joint Health and Safety Committee. So figuring out, is this going to work? So there is support out there for you. And so some of the things in here, consider tasks that you can minimize or eliminate. So these are recommendations. Can you vacuum instead of sweep? Wet wipe instead of dry dust? What about the mix? Use the correct concentration. So making sure your staff are trained on that. Floor markings. This was an interesting one. Do not shake dirty laundry. Minimizes the possibility of dispersing droplets. And laundering at the highest temperature possible. So maybe, we've seen a little bit of this, that some of the environmental practices are being paused in order to heighten the hygiene practices. So again, an interesting crossroad here. So this is an example of what you're going to find on the workplace safety and prevention services. And it's broken down by industry. So this was under the tourism sector, looking at housekeeping and laundry. And so really when we're looking at the piece that we've just covered, it's learn, plan, and implement. So news is changing daily. Stay on top of the guidelines, research what's out there. Consider what your operation will likely need to address. So the bathroom, and is it going to be open? Is it going to be for guests only? And how, or are you going to open it at all? I know that's been an issue here in the city, that the parks are open, but the bathrooms are closed. So it's a bit of a problem. I think that is now being addressed. And, when given the signal, you've really done your research, you've considered what you need, and you've got a plan ready, and then you can move quickly into implementation. So you're back ready to welcome guests. Okay, any comments or questions before I move on? Okay, great. So I wanted to, this has been a hot topic, the dealing with the whole cancellation. Such an interesting time. And so, we've got current travel restrictions impacting all our bookings, or many of our bookings, not all of them. So in here, if I can get an indication from you, who here had a personal travel plan get canceled due to COVID-19? I can certainly wave my hand on that one. I had a couple of them. So I'll continue.
As well, Eva.
What's that?
I can as well.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got 2 yeses for sure. If there's others that had that happen.
We've got a few coming through here. Yes, personal plans canceled. Lindsay, our digital marketing specialist, has had 2 events canceled.
Okay.
Three so far for somebody else, not going until March 2021. Well, that's sad, but
okay.
better to wait. Yes, so it looks like a lot.
Lot. Okay. And so in here, I'm sure that you ran into the situation, or likely ran into the situation that if you got a full refund, good for you. Some of you may have. Some of you may have lost money, didn't get any of it back, or a small percentage back. Some may have got a travel credit. So lots of different approaches here of what's happening. And the same thing is when you're looking at your own business. And so I want to take a look at the customer lifestyle. So you've life cycle, not the lifestyle, the life cycle. So you've done a great job, finding customers for your business, connecting and engaging, and then you've been able to transact. And now we're in, unless you're a brand new business, you're just starting this. I'm assuming most of you are well into the cycle. And so now we're at the loyalty, advocacy and ambassador, and the retain. So and now you're looking at a difficult conversation. So how does that impact the customer loyalty? And that's really what it comes down to. If you are, and even if you are a one-time transactional business where you're not expecting to see that customer again, you still have the impact of your online reputation. And that impacts kind of, that ambassador piece is then disrupted. So looking at your customer and really asking yourself the question, what percentage of my customers repeat, and how important is that guest loyalty to me? So again, if you're one-time transactional, probably not that much. And so it's really finding that balance between the existing policies and the cash flow and the desperate need for cash flow as we're facing businesses now closed for months, and then the customer relationship and the long-term impact. And so we're really, at this stage, looking at our bookings. And so anybody traveling in June, you will want to contact to discuss the bookings and plans. Some may still be able to travel. So if you have bookings locally, there's a possibility that they might be able to travel as long as they comply to the guidelines. If they're from out of province, out of country, they can't come. Some borders are closed, as we know, and in others, they'll have to isolate for 14 days. Well, that probably doesn't work well for their plans. And then that's the immediate, and then looking at July onwards, and just getting a sense, touching base with them. You're waiting for information, and it could be that US border to open, and then talking to them about a plan, asking them if they want to delay. So someone with their travel plan said, I'm not going till March 2021. So is this an option? Would you consider letting them rebook for next summer at this stage? And then, because they may not be able to travel, then you have a real good sense of your inventory or your restaurant capacity or the booking on the experience or the attraction. And then kind of saying, okay, now I'm going to focus very much on the Ontario market. I know what I'm looking at. And then those further out. So into August in the fall, at this point, I think it's fairly safe to assume that large groups will likely not be able to happen. So if you've got a family reunion with 50 plus people, a good chance for 2020 that's not in the cards for us this year. And so, how are you going to help that person with their event? So really taking a very strategic look at what you have on the books and working directly with your customer. And, would you allow them to cancel at this stage? And what would that penalty, if there's a penalty, or what would that offer? So penalty is such a negative approach, but what would be how could you work that out that both of you are actually happy? And so it's really at first being clear on your goals and priorities and understanding your business. So if your goal and priority is to maintain a high repeat factor of your existing customer base, you will make different decisions. And then really considering your options. And that becomes a conversation, and the story in here has an impact. So perhaps a family had been planning to come, and their parent with the entire family, and the parent is in a seniors resident and they can't get out. Does that change how you would approach that situation? And then really implementing a solution, and then a communication plan. And so really the existing bookings, it's, can they travel? What about the health legislation as it relates to isolation? And then balancing it with your cancellation policy. So you had a cancellation policy, and even if the customer had insurance, that may not protect them either. I'll touch on that in a moment. And it's coming up with a solution that both of you are happy with. They realize, of course, that your business has been closed or couldn't open. Perhaps if you open later in the season, you haven't addressed that yet. So, having that conversation, figuring out what works for both of you. And so with the insurance, it was interesting from the research. So for many insurance policies purchased after March 12th, because at that point, COVID-19 or the pandemic was known, you will not be protected for it. And so, we've got some companies, so Blue Cross said it won't cover individuals, but it doesn't impact group policies. So there's really no guarantee, even if you had insurance. If you had it prior to March 12th, if they had planned their trip early in the year and bought insurance, perhaps they are covered. And so this was kind of from Forbes. Unfortunately, many credit card cancellation benefits. So if they thought they were covered on their credit card, or private insurance companies do not cover pandemics. And so, even with the insurance, they'll be back to that situation of what do we do now? And so it comes down to balancing the short-term gain versus the potential loss of a long-term customer and looking at your long-term goals. And I think at this stage, it's being very transparent, saying, I know this was the policy, we had anticipated this booking, I know that you can't travel, how can we make this work? And then ensuring your reputation's intact. And so, what do you need to do in the short term? Is your long-term business contingent on repeat? So how are you going to handle that? And then having the honest conversation, back to that we're all in this together. And this slide here, this just kind of covers off the general steps in having a difficult conversation. So really listening, so getting the facts, and everyone's got a different story and a different reason that they may not be able to travel, reiterating what you heard, and then showing some empathy. It's a very challenging time for all of us. Looking at some ideas and inviting your customer to go, well, what would work for you? What would be reasonable for you? And then starting from there and then agreeing on a solution. And loyal customers, they don't just come back and they don't simply recommend you. They insist that their friends do business with you. And this might be at risk. And so with the future bookings, it's a little easier because you can take a very much a proactive approach to it. What we are seeing is incredible flexibility for future bookings. And I've got a couple of examples to share with you from a few sectors of the tourism industry. So the first one I have is cruise. So the cruise industry, the poor cruise industry, such a challenging time with some of the incidents that happened where, the guests couldn't get off and there were sick passengers. So what is happening now is, this was from one of the big cruise companies. Book select 2020 cruises for great offers. Plus you can cancel for any reason and receive a future cruise credit. Cancellations within 48 hours on cruises departing before July 31st. So unprecedented. Accommodation, seeing lots. So some of them, day of cancellations. And the interesting thing with the accommodators, they're also extending this to third party or the online travel agent, so different channels. And then the air travel. And so in here, if you made a flight for travel on or after March 1st, you can change your existing booking, no fee, up to 2 hours prior. And you've got 24 months to rebook that. So, tightening up your cancellation policy right now probably isn't going to work for you. So what is some flexibility? And maybe this doesn't work for you, and that's okay. But, what can you do to ensure that that guest has the flexibility, because there's still so many unknowns. Great, okay. Comments or questions on that? Okay, I'll carry on here. We'll talk a little bit about, what it might look like down the line. And so we know that air travel is going to take a little longer to rebound. Certainly seeing that. And the anticipation is that if you're dependent on corporate business travel, that's probably going to come back the quickest. So someone coming in to see their retail outlets or their regional office in your community, they may be traveling soon. And one of the things we saw after post-SARS and September 11th is the actual distance that someone is willing to drive. And this is really probably a little bit more related to 9/11. So at that point, travelers were willing to drive up to 10 hours. That shifted since then, but we're going to see more than likely a bigger drive market and more than likely longer distances. So it's going to be a focus on local and regional travel. And the Ontario drive market is going to be the first to respond. So if I know that now, what can I do in order to impact that? So we want to focus on that local and drive market for summer 2020. US might come back later in 2020. At this point, that's a big unknown. And international, we're really looking at 2021. So if we know that the drive market is, local drive market is our best bet, how can I start putting some things in place? How might I need to alter my product or experience to relate to that market? And so some of the things, looking at your existing customer base. So those that may have been with you in the last maybe 2-3 years. So having that hopefully permission-based database that you've already got permission on it, and having that ready to go. So it could be just touching base. It's a soft sell, and once things open up, bringing your experiences, bringing your information to them. Have your communication, ready on your health and safety plan. Develop that now, so when you need to send that out, it's ready to go. And really start looking at these local experiences with community partners. And so part of this will be perhaps to go after a new market. So maybe the family market hasn't been your top market, but you're seeing potential there. So what are some things that I could develop that would appeal to that market? And if I don't have it myself, who in my community does? How can we partner and build an experience for that market? We can also use this to look at gaps. So if restaurants are currently not open, how are you going to deal with the food aspect? Are there partners in your community? Will you consider, if you have a B&B, having a barbecue that the staff, that the guests can access? Is there a partnership with a local grocery store that you might put in place, or at least having information available? So what gaps do I have? Are people going to come if there's nothing to do? So if the regular attractions and regular experiences are not opening and may not, taking a look at what has opened. So promoting activities that have already rebounded. So certainly the golf courses, the boating, the tennis, things like that. Are there experiences and offers that I can put into place that includes those? So what I've popped up here, and I know you can't read this, but it's really just to show you what's happening on a national level. And this is Destination Canada's plan. And the provinces are all in different ways falling in with this. So the first one is it's response, recovery, and resilience. So, and they've broken it down into 4 or 5 different categories. So taking a look at, the sales and marketing, be interesting for you to know what's happening on a national level. And on a national level, the focus is domestic travel as well. And from an Ontario level, I had the chance to reach out to Destination Ontario this week. And the response was, for us, we here at Destination Ontario are taking a thoughtful approach to our marketing efforts. At this time, all regular marketing activities are paused. However, continuing to engage our social community with virtual experiences and the stay-at-home message and inspiring future travel, monitoring research and connected with Destination Canada. So aligned with that plan, with the stakeholders and key businesses, and working together with industry for a strong recovery effort. And then really having a dynamic market by market strategic response once it's safe to travel again, safe for people to travel. So I had a couple of examples of some social media that's out there. So promoting local experiences. Here we can, while we can only appreciate Ontario's wonders from afar, knowing it's waiting for us when things open up. This is promoting music from the Kingston area. So lots of ways to do a gentle check-in with your customers and just stay kind of beside them and top of mind. So when things open up, they're ready to come visit you again. From a business to business perspective, we talked about short haul. So short term is really short haul at this point. So looking at the Ontario market, but don't forget your international market. If you are travel trade ready and you've been working with the overseas market, they're needing information from you now. So they're planning 2021 now, knowing that 2020 has shifted. They're also trying to salvage their bookings. So they may have had trips coming to Canada, which can no longer come, but they're trying to book them into 2021. So they need some flexibility from you. They need quick response times. Everyone's trying to work together to ensure that we, you know, for the long term, we didn't lose all the customers for 2020. We just shifted them into the future. Also consider looking at the meetings and convention. It's probably going to be longer term. Is there some innovation that you can have a small group there, the rest are dialing in or coming in online? How can we do that? And so looking at smaller regional groups, so people want to connect. Is there a chance to go after that from a business to business perspective? And so that kind of takes us to the end of the presentation. And the key message I want to leave with you is the time to communicate, connect, adapt, and plan is very much now. There's so many things that you need to consider as a business owner, and we're going to run out of time if we wait to the last minute. So really taking a look at that and seeing what we can do now. So Lori, I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm going to open it up for any additional questions or comments, anything we've got.
Okay, thanks so much, Eva. While people enter some questions into the chat section, you know, you've really touched on some important and valuable information and certainly best practices to take forward. This is uncharted territory for all of us. There's so much that we still don't know, but we are all in the same boat and are experiencing the same learning curve. So most people are going to be forgiving. You know, I think it's going to take a lot of patience moving forward. And as business owners, you shoulder a huge responsibility to ensure that, you know, certainly not just your customers are taken care of, but your staff. So some key takeaways that certainly I had while you were speaking, Eva, is the importance of having a variety of leadership styles. You know, wearing different hats is nothing new to business owners, but we all sort of default to what's comfortable for us in our leadership style. And without a doubt, we're going to have to be looking at some alternatives, whether they're just situational or some that we adapt. It's okay to make mistakes. That was one that was brought up in the chat room, and boy, that's really important. Again, it's new to everyone, so not being so hard on yourself, understanding that you and your staff and even customers are going to be making some mistakes as we go, and maybe losing their cool a little bit more than they should, but being able to take a step back. Your two approaches, which is really the what and the how, and I think that's what most people are here today, is cleaning. So what are your cleaning standards? And then secondly, the how, your guest interaction. So how are you going to convey your messaging regarding safety standards, changes in policy, etc.? How do you handle the communication piece when you've got, you know, a coronavirus Karen, if anyone who knows what that is, someone who challenges the COVID safety standards? How do you handle them? And then how do you handle people with genuine concerns? Sometimes it's about more than the guidelines. You may want to do more to ensure your staff and your guests are safe. I do know that one of our partners actually had closed her in because of the concern for her staff. She could have remained open, but it just wasn't worth it. So again, to reiterate, posting the need to post your cleaning and sanitizing standards for everyone to see. So ensuring this is listed not only in-house, but on your website when people are visiting your website, on your social channels if you have those. Really important to provide that information for people. As well, having policies in place. Training your staff is probably one of those areas that is time consuming and sometimes is not viewed as important as it should be. And I think in a situation like this, it's very delicate, but your staff need to be trained on how to convey the messaging that you're putting out there, how to explain policies in a way that that customers understand that it is in their best interest, and to keep your reputation intact. Customer loyalty is vital at a time like this. So, you know, if you employ and engage all of these sorts of tactics, you stand a much better chance of a smooth opening or reopening, and of gaining customer loyalty or keeping the loyalty that you have in place. So let's see if we have any questions. If anyone does have any questions, please type them into the chat.
Great recap, Lori. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Excellent presentation from Barbara. Thank you. Should have been on some of this before. Well, stay tuned, Barbara. We're hoping to have more webinars moving forward. We do realize that, again, that this is all new for everyone, and you're going to be looking for information from those in the know, and Eva is certainly in the know. Eva, I appreciate you coming on in such short notice, and excellent presentation. Really enjoyed that you brought in not only a variety of sectors, but a variety of countries and what they're doing in the reopening process. Goes without saying that there will be a great deal of information to absorb moving forward. Many opportunities to gather that information from a variety of sources, and I would encourage anyone to visit our social sites for links to public health, to those sites who are going to have the most updated and relevant information that you'll need moving forward. So it is 2:36. Again, I appreciate Eva. I appreciate everyone who joined the call today, and I wish you a lovely afternoon if the rain stays away.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Stay safe and good luck with the reopening of your businesses, and have a great summer. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.